I thought I didn't film enough in Japan, but looking back on it, I think I got something more important. I planned everything for content, trying to capture every moment like a movie. But it didn't really turn out like that. So instead of showing you everything I did, which is a little bit generic, people have done that before, I'm going to try and tell you what each place actually taught me. Arriving in Tokyo after a rough first 24 hours of travelling felt surreal. Stepping out of the underground into the streets of Asakusa was amazing. I was astonished by how clean it was. That was the first thing I noticed. And I think that was my first real takeaway from Tokyo, how the small details really impact how a place feels. The metro took a bit of adapting to, but once I got over this, everything just worked. The trains were always on time and orderly, and although it's one of the busiest cities in the world, I never felt overwhelmed at all. I've heard a lot of people say that Tokyo is a traveller's playground, and I'd be inclined to agree with them. I ended up in Ueno Zoo, I think I pronounced that correct, completely by chance, and I think that was probably one of my favourite days. I was exploring Ueno Park at the time, and it turned out to be one of my favourite parts. I didn't feel overly touristy. It felt like a place where more locals would go, and I thought that was something quite nice. The zoo in itself is huge, and I didn't know this, but it's the oldest zoo in Japan. And there's loads of different animals. I saw the giant Andean condor, which was really cool. It's got a really massive wingspan, and it's absolutely huge. And I also saw a polar bear for the first time ever, which was pretty cool. Another place that stood out to me was Team Lab's Planets. It was a little bit more awkward to get to than I expected, but once I was there, it was a really great experience. Immersive and very, very different to other art museums that I've been to. But I think what stuck out to me most about Tokyo was not any one place in particular, but how it all came together for such a densely populated city, how orderly and non-overwhelming, how peaceful it feels. The sounds, the cleanliness, the way people move, and even the little melodies played at pedestrian crossings and on the trains. It all made the city feel strangely calm, and Tokyo made me realise that even in busy places, life doesn't have to feel stressful. If all the small details are correct, everything else just sort of follows. After a few energetic days in Tokyo, I hopped on a bullet train and made my way up into the Japanese Alps to a place called Nozawa Onsen. The difference was immediate. As soon as I stepped off the train, it was noticeably colder and quieter. A completely different place, even though it was only 2 hours away. And this was the place where everything slowed down. The village itself really felt like stepping back in time. Traditional houses and snow on the roofs gave this impression that you were going back in time to a much simpler way of living. I stayed in a small townhouse run by a local family, where I slept on futons with tatami mats, and honestly it was one of the best sleeps I've ever had. Something to do with the cold air and being really tired after snowboarding just made me sleep amazing. Snowboarding there felt different too. The resort was much smaller and more personal, much smaller than places I've been to in Europe and the French Alps, and the snow felt more powdery too. But I gotta say, the onsen for me was one of the best parts of the trip there. Something about hopping into the boiling water, and I mean boiling, it must have been 50 or 60 degrees after a long day snowboarding, really helped with the muscles. Bathing with others and the communal kind of way of bathing that they do there was a little bit weird at the start, but once I got used to it, it was definitely one of the highlights and most relaxing parts of the trip. And I think that's what Nozawa taught me. You don't realise how fast you're living until you're actually forced to slow down. Everything there felt more natural and more in tune with nature, and it made me realise how rarely I actually get to do things like that and to slow down and switch off. After a few days in the mountains, I headed across the top of Japan down to Kyoto, and I think like most people, I expected Kyoto to feel small and almost frozen in time, but it wasn't like that at all. It's a big city to start and very spread out. And to be honest, I felt a bit overwhelmed, and I'd say that's probably my first realisation, is not to rely on expectations all the time, but to learn how to adapt as well. Transport wasn't as easy as Tokyo either. The underground system there's a lot more limited, and I had to rely a lot more on just walking or taking the bus. But once I adjusted, Kyoto was one of my favourite places. There's something about Kyoto which really forces you to slow down, and that's not because it's quiet, it's kind of the opposite, it's quite a busy place. But it's because of what's around you. You're surrounded by temples and gardens and traditional streets, and it's just somewhere not to rush. I found myself doing less but noticing more, just walking and observing and really noticing the intricacies of these different buildings and all the interesting traditional architecture. And I think the tea ceremony I went to was one of the best examples of that. It wasn't just about drinking tea, but the process of making it, the history and the attention behind the ceremony itself. And I think that's what Kyoto gave me, an appreciation for being present. Not everything needs to be fast or productive. Sometimes just experiencing is enough. I had 5 days in Kyoto, and for me 3 days was more than enough, so one of the best decisions I made was to make a trip to Nara. And what stood out to me for this was just how simple the day was. You don't really need a plan, you kind of just go walk around the park and look at some deer and explore some temples, that's kind of it. But it's something about that which makes it so good. When I arrived there, I went much further into the park, away from the main entrance, and it was a lot quieter and there was less people and the deer were much more friendly. And this was a good idea. It felt much more peaceful and like the real thing, which you see online. There were moments where I was just walking around the park, surrounded by deer and temples, and it made me wonder what life might be like for the monks that live there, and how simple it must be and how nice. And I think that's what Nara taught me. Not everything needs to be complicated to be enjoyable. Sometimes the best experiences are the ones where you're not really doing much at all. You're just enjoying yourself in the moment. The following day, I made my way to Osaka, and I might have even preferred it to Tokyo. It felt more local, more raw, and less polished than Tokyo in a way that, to me, felt livable. I didn't see loads of the city, to be honest. I ended up spending way too long in the aquarium, which I don't regret because it's so worth seeing. I saw whale sharks and manta rays, and those are two things I've never seen before, so I had so much fun. I also went to this massive arcade called what's it called? Round One Arena. That's what the stadium was called, thank you. Which, to be honest, I thought it was going to be great. And I don't think it was the best experience, in all honesty. A lot of the machines were broken and it was too busy. It was too long waiting for the activities there. But I think even that added something to my experience. Osaka didn't feel perfect, but that's why I kind of liked it. It made it feel more real. It made it feel more like people actually lived there rather than just passed by. And I don't think things have to be polished to be enjoyable. They don't have to be perfect to have fun. And in fact, sometimes imperfections are what makes a place feel more human, like it's actually, like I said, lived in. So after all that, would I go back? And I've got to say 100% yes. But I don't think I'd do it in quite the same way. In general, the trip felt quite generic. I went to the big cities and the main attractions, and truthfully, I don't regret any of that. But if I were to go back, I think I'd go deeper. I'd visit the smaller villages and spend more time in nature. Because I think what this trip showed me is there's way more to Japan than what's seen online, and I've barely scratched the surface of any of it. I went into it thinking I didn't film enough, and looking back, I think I might have experienced more because of it. And honestly, I think that's better.